In this video, we're going to be talking about one of the scariest exercises you're going to do if you have back pain or are recovering from back pain. It's one that inspires fear into those on their rehab journey, but it is one that is necessary as much as it is fearful or fear-provoking. And we're going to talk all about this, the hip hinge, in today's video. We're going to go through what it is, why you need to do it, when perhaps you should and shouldn't be doing it, and more importantly, how to do it, how to break it down, what you should be feeling, etc. So let's get into today's video. So it is important that if you are recovering from back pain and maybe you're early on in your journey, you need to be able to engage your core effectively. That's going to be a vital part in this role. You need to be able to stabilize the spine effectively, and then you can build into this particular exercise. So knowing exactly where you are in the rehab process is important. This isn't something you do right after you've injured your back. You need to put it in at the right time. But those of you that do know when you're doing it, this is going to be really, really helpful. And if you don't know, then post in the comments. How long have you had your back pain? Have you just started recovering? Can you engage your core effectively? And can you do some simplistic floor-based core exercises to really start to feel that engagement and you're ready to transition to something like the hip hinge? So why are we doing this hip hinge exercise? Well, most people, when they injure their lower back, it's got some degree of flexion to it. It's a loss of the effective hip hinge. It's the movement of flexion that was going through the hips, for example, is translating into the lumbar spine. We get this flexion happening here. We start to injure the discs in the lower lumbar spine. We create segmental strains in the lower lumbar spine. We're talking about L4-5, L5, S1 junctions, and we injure those segments. It's an inability to do this movement correctly at scale that really leads to that back pain in the first place, or back injury in the first place. And remember, you don't actually have to have back pain here. It could be more sciatic type symptoms, a back injury that's resulting in symptoms going down the leg, maybe from the glute and further down. So that's important too. Now, if we get back to this, the problem of not maintaining this lordosis when we do that hip hinge motion is that it puts flexion through the lumbar spine. It also disengages the sacroiliac joints, relatively speaking, compared to a nice neutral spine. So if we're then weight bearing and load bearing, we're putting that spine in a compromised position in which it's likely to get aggravated further. Then we take exercises that people typically do, knee hugs, child's pose, those sorts of things which further around the lumbar spine, and we're just really destroying our ability to effectively do this hip hinge by just never doing it, never starting to bring an air of discreteness back to hip motion, allowing the hips to move on their own independently of the lumbar spine, maintaining it steady. And that hopefully brings back the earlier warning at the start of this video to say, are you ready to do this? Can you control movement in the lumbar spine? Have you done that basic core engagement work? Have you done that basic trunk stability work to allow you to hold this spine steady? Because if you can't do that, you are going to find the hip hinge movement itself, one, difficult to do effectively. Two, you won't necessarily know you're doing it effectively because you're not aware of this area as you should be, in a good way, not in a sort of OCD way or anything like that, but you're not aware of what's happening here as you're moving moment to moment. And number three, you could really make things worse if you don't do it properly and you're not aware of those things. So timing is, of course, everything with this. We want you to do it at the right time for you. So why is this movement essential? Well, it's essential. We've covered what it is. You're never going to be able to avoid doing a hip hinge or a movement that should involve a hip hinge. You're going to be sitting down in chairs, you're going to be getting up and down off the floor, we're going to be going up, downstairs. We're going to be doing all sorts of movements that involve us going from up and about level down to on the ground or into those chairs level. That involves an element of hip hinge. And if we can start to learn to do this effectively in the early stages of recovery, and that's not right at the start, but in the earlier stages, we can start to master this movement, then we're going to find that we are putting our back into that compromised position much less frequently. And this is all about why back pain persists for such a long period of time. Because it's not normally the exercise you're doing, in many cases, or there may be some bad exercises for sure, but it's not just that. It's the fact that you're doing exercises maybe for 1 hour a day, but you're completely ignoring the other 15, 16 hours a day where you're doing all these sorts of activities and not controlling your spinal stability properly. And often patients with back pain put too much emphasis, almost myopic emphasis, on just the exercises that literally make up a fraction of the day and don't consider the wider implications of that other 16 hours of the day where you're doing these movements. So this is why we're learning the hip hinge and we're learning to do it effectively, so that with repetition, with practice, with continuity, we can start subconsciously moving like this on a day-to-day basis in those other 16 hours. And that's where a lot of the battle needs to be put on that back pain. Yes, you need to do your right exercises and your right rehab work, but we also need to apply that in a subconscious manner to our other activities that we're doing on a daily basis, and that's really important. So With that out of the way, let's get into how to do this exercise. So first, when we're doing this exercise, you're going to feel it in certain areas, and we need to draw attention to those areas and how we're going to do this exercise effectively so we can actually feel it in the right places in the spine. Now, if I come from the side here, I'm just going to lift my shirt up a little bit so you can see where my spine actually starts. Now, right here where my thumb is here, that is this point just here. So my spine actually hasn't begun yet. And this is one of the big things with these sorts of videos is you don't actually know where the person's anatomy is, so it's difficult to picture that in your mind. So this bit right here is right here. So my spine is starting up here, so I need to hold that very steady. Then we've got the glutes here. And all that's happening is the spine stays steady and we're just coming over like so into this position. My spine, my lower back here, has not moved at all. It's all hips here, as opposed to tucking under and doing some weird sort of semi-crouching, like you're crouching in a corner or something. That's weird. We want to make sure nice and neutral and then coming around. So what are the important training points here when we're doing this particular exercise? The first thing we're going to do here is we want to do a little chest pop. Chest pop's going to help us orientate our whole spine properly. So we take the bottom of your sternum here, your breastbone, and we're lifting that up to the corner, we're popping the chest out here and depressing the shoulders. That engages this upper area in the back, and that's going to feed into your lower back as well. Core's nice and tight as well. Then we hold everything nice and tight and we just pivot from the hips. Now, the important thing that often puts people off here is you get a tension coming in through here. That's okay. That's your lower back muscles working, doing their job with the core that's coming around here and holding everything nice and stable, nice and strong. We want that. We should feel that. That is one of the big things that really throws people off. Oh, my back's tense. I can feel tension in my back. That's normal. It should be. If your back wasn't tense, what would happen is you'd go like this and you just flop forwards, okay? The back muscles need to be engaged here with your core. It's a cylindrical core set. The whole thing works together. Now, as we're going down like so, I kind of pause a little bit because that's when my hamstrings kick in. My hamstrings are what drive the extension and flexion through the hip. They either slowly lower me down like so, now I can feel them. I can't go any further from my hip sockets or from my hip joints because my hamstrings will not allow me. If I go any further, I'm rounding my back, and we don't do that. So we keep nice and good integrity in this upper body area above the waist, and then the hips, the hamstrings are holding us here. So at the bottom of the rep, this is the bottom, this is the top, we're going to feel those hamstrings kick in. Then we use those hamstrings, core engaged, and obviously everything above the waist is staying nice and strong, and then we come back up like so, and then we go down again. We don't go too far either. We don't go like that or any of this sort of stuff. You'll see people doing that in the gym sometimes with deadlifts, and they come down off the floor and they kick forwards like that. That movement is unnecessary, it's unhelpful, and if anything, you're going to bang those little facet joints down together on one another at the lower lumbar spine, so watch out for that. It's really important to avoid that. So if you haven't done this exercise before, I'd really encourage you to play around with it first, doing the exercise and what's called shadowing. Shadowing allows you, and while I'm doing this exercise, I've done a couple of demonstrations already now, and all through here I can feel you've got blood in the muscles, there's a bit of tension there. You can probably tell I'm a little bit out of breath from talking and doing this at the same time. So we're nice and engaged and tight, and we shadow the reps. Have your hands wherever you want them, but imagine you're going to be carrying a weight later on or some sort of bands, and we come down, 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 boom, that's it, and then come back up. And we just shadow these reps. See what you feel. Where do you feel it? Making sure everything is becoming nice and mechanical, like I'm doing it. We're not kind of wobbling all over the place as we go down. We're nice and uniform, like a robot almost. Because if it becomes robotic when you're doing it here, then you're going to be able to really hip hinge when you integrate it with the knees as well later on. You don't need to worry about that for this video, but you get the point. Just practicing it from the hips. And even one thing that's quite nice to do is if you press into your hips, we get those bony bits, then we grab the spine. So we've got the spine again in front of me. These bony bits just here are the bony bits on the front of your hips. If we bang just below those, it helps us get into that hip hinge position. So as we come like that, we push backwards through here. That's going to help us do the nice hip hinge as we press through those. And that little aid can just help you bend around the right axis, i.e. the hips, because you're putting your hand onto the front of the hip socket as you do the movement. You do this gently. You do a couple of repetitions, do a few more repetitions. Feel the movement becomes very, very comfortable, very natural. Feel what's going on. And then when we add resistance on, which we'll go through in a moment, you're going to find that you can then start to enhance the tension or the strain on these muscles. And that's the purpose of training. Now, like magic, I now have two tools that I can use to increase the resistance strain of this exercise. So we've got the resistance bands, which we'll go through first, and then we've got the kettlebell as well. I know pink does look great. So we'll start off with the resistance bands. Hook them together. These are really, really versatile. It's fantastic. You can use them for all sorts of things. Take them and obviously start with a light resistance band. But we have to bear in mind, this is what will become a relatively strong movement. You might be in the future, let's think about real world activities. You might be picking up the holiday suitcase, that's 20 kilos. Well, these aren't that heavy. So you're going to be building up over time. The important thing is over time, not over a week or a few days or a month. It's going to take a bit of time for you to build this up. So, how do we do it with a band? Nice and easy. Just pop your foot either side and make sure you have your foot planted effectively. We don't want any accidents to happen. So we're coming out, I'll just do it from the side so you guys can see. Take a hold, come down, and then literally just come up through here. Now you can use the stronger resistance if you want. We can also bring it up to here and hold it up nice and high, and then do the same exercise like so, focusing on keeping the hamstrings being that trigger. I'm at the bottom now, and then coming back up. We do want a slight kink in the knees. Locked out legs are just not particularly good for the joints. You run the risk of putting too much stress on the back of your knee. Same as with a hamstring stretch. We want a slight bend in the knees at least, just to protect and brace that joint so the strain is going through the muscle, not the joint capsule or the ligaments. They're not designed for that kind of strain, so be careful with that point. And the next one, make sure when you're using the band, you disembark effectively and safely. We don't just let it ping all over the shop. So just slowly lower the weight and then pop it on the side. Same thing with the kettlebell, nice and easy. And there's two cool things you can do with the kettlebell. Number one, we hold it in both hands, just like the band, and we just again, down and back up. And you can tell this is very light overall. The other one, we can hold it in one hand. And this allows us to start to train in a bit of torsion. As we go down, this is pulling us off to the side. It's creating that torsional stress through our spine, which is going to happen through the day, no matter whether you like it or not. You're going to run the risk of this happening, so why not train for it? So when you're using one hand, you focus on not allowing your body to be torsioned, and you focus on keeping it nice and steady as we come up and not twisting round. So that's the beauty of working asymmetrically here. And hopefully, just one more repetition just to show you guys from the side, holding it there, one hand maybe, and down and back up, down and back up, down and back up. And that is pretty much it. I hope you found this video helpful, and I hope it dispelled some of the concerns. Yes, this exercise can be really scary. Yes, it is something that people really are really fearful of in terms of getting back into these sorts of exercises. But the reality is you're going to be putting load through that spine, whether you like it or not. And you need to start learning how to do it safely, how to do it effectively, so that can make you stronger, so you're more able to participate in those daily activities that you're going to do without the risk of injuring yourself with something silly like picking up that holiday suitcase that we mentioned earlier on in the video. If you did find this video helpful, do consider giving us a thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any of these videos. And if you know someone else that's struggling with their back pain, consider sharing this video with them. Hopefully it'll help them avoid some of those little errors that you can make and help them do these sorts of exercises sooner rather than later. Because all too often, people are paralyzed by fear when it comes to doing any sort of resistance-based exercises. They need a little bit of encouragement, a little bit of guidance, responsible guidance to do these things effectively. Until then, we'll see you in another video. Thanks for watching.